What are some ridiculous history facts? In ancient Egypt, servants were smeared with honey to attract flies away from the pharaoh. When the Romans laid siege to Themyscira, a real place weirdly enough, they attempted to tunnel into the city. The Themyscirans released bears into the tunnels. The first bomb dropped on Berlin by the British during World War II claimed no human casualties, but it did kill an elephant. Claudius Drusus died in AD 20 from asphyxiation when he tossed a pear in the air and caught it in his mouth. The pear tree was put on trial, found guilty of murder, and destroyed. The Battle of Bull Run, during the American Civil War, was called the Picnic Battle because so many civilians from Washington went on picnics on the sidelines and watched. But once the battle actually started, and the Union started to get its ass kicked, they all ran away, running over injured soldiers and dead bodies and generally disrupting the battle. This was actually a relatively common thing during the Civil War. I know it happened at Gettysburg too. Ancient Romans would put sandals on the hands of sleeping people then tickle their face so they would slap themselves. The Spartans never built a city wall, figuring that their reputation alone would mean no one would dare attack them. But, during the Persian War, the Persians, who had already burned Athens twice, hired a Greek guide to take them to Sparta. But when they got there, they saw a kinda crap looking city without even a wall. They figured there was no way this place could be the mighty Sparta they had heard so much about. So they figured the Greek was lying and thus Sparta was spared. Edit. I'm remembering this from reading it in the book Persian Fire by Tom Holland. It's quite possible that I'm misremembering details or that Holland's text identifies this as a legend or story. Still, the book is a fantastic read and I heartily recommend it. Colombia has a period in history literally called the dumb homeland period because of how incredibly dumb politicians acted at the time. A Chinese emperor escaped an assassin by running around a pillar. After 2 hours, the assassin got bored and went home, and wasn't charged for his crimes. Montenegro technically was in war with Japan for 101 years and they signed a peace treaty in 2006. Montenegro was allied with Russia in Russo-Japanese War and they declared war on Japan but they forgot to peace. At US President Andrew Jackson's funeral in 1845, his pet parrot had to be removed because it was swearing. 1904 Olympic marathon in St. Louis, the #1 finisher drove most of the race. He started the race, got tired and heat exhausted and wanted to drop out. He got in a car to DQ himself and head back to the stadium but along the way realized he was near the finish line and got out to claim the glory. The #2 finisher was carried across the finish line by his trainers. On a bogus pseudoscience theory, the trainers had been giving him a mixture of brandy, egg whites, and rat poison instead of water, and it came out that the #1 finisher had driven most of the course. This guy was given the gold despite the help from his trainers to finish. For some reason, the #3 finisher was just a regular guy who did nothing unusual. In this case, ordinary was extraordinary. The #4 finisher was a Cuban mailman who had raised the money to attend the Olympics by running around his entire country and asking for donations. When he landed in New Orleans, he lost all the money gambling. He managed to scrounge enough to get to St. Louis and attend the Olympics. However, he had no money for athletic gear, so he ran in dress shoes and pants hacked off at the knee by a fellow racer who happened to have a knife. He probably would have come in first had it not been for the hour-long nap he took on the side of the road after eating rotten apples he found at an orchard near the course. The #9 and #12 finishers were from South Africa and ran barefoot. South Africa didn't actually send a delegation. These were students who just happened to be in town and thought it sounded fun. #9 was chased a mile off course by angry dogs. Half the participants had never raced competitively before. Some died. St. Louis only had one water stop on the entire run. This, coupled with the dusty road, and exacerbated by the cars kicking up dust, led to several fatalities. The Russian delegation arrived a week late because they were still using the Julian calendar until 1918, while effectively the rest of the world had switched to the Gregorian calendar. Credit to Udrakan Perothean for this synopsis, which I have shamelessly stolen and tweaked just a little for clarity and brevity. At one time there was not only a pope and an anti-pope but also a counter-anti-pope. When the Netherlands was occupied by Nazis in 1940, many people fled to Canada, including Princess Juliana of the Netherlands and her husband Prince Bernhard of Lippe-Biesterfeld. Their daughter, Princess Margriet, was born in Ottawa, not knowing if the baby would be male, and hence the heir to the throne. Canada declared the maternity ward of the Ottawa Hospital extraterritorial, which means it became international territory. This meant that the baby would derive its nationality only from its mother, making it 100% Dutch. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams died on the same day, the 4th of July, 1826, the 50th anniversary of them both signing the Declaration of Independence. Adams's last words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives. He was wrong by about 5 hours." There used to be bread stamps burned into a cooked loaf of bread to avoid bread fraud, as the government supplied the wheat flour, but some bakers tried to use sawdust and other ingredients in the bread to make the wheat last longer. The bread stamps were baker specific, so they could track down where any tainted bread came from. If they were caught, they had to move to another town to make bread, or wait 3 years to continue making bread if I remember correctly. As St. Lawrence was roasted to death on a gridiron, he is said to have remarked to his torturers, "I am cooked on this side, turn me over." St. Lawrence is the patron saint of cooks and comedians. During the most critical portion of World War II, the Japanese thought they had sunk or disabled 3 American carriers when, in reality, they had only bombed the USS Yorktown 3 times. They were caught with their pants down when the bombs started landing at Midway. During World War II, a bunch of German soldiers got separated in rural Russia. They were trudging through snow with no food or water for days before finally finding a supply drop that missed its mark. They opened it up and found only black pepper and condoms. Edit. For anyone wondering, my source for this is Storm of War by Andrew Roberts. Unfortunately I can't remember the page number because I read the book a few years ago, but I believe the chapter is called Clash of the Titans. I'm sorry I don't have a more exact source, but I'm a random commenter, not a history teacher. Admiral Zinovy Reshestvinsky of the Imperial Russian Navy was so notorious for throwing his binoculars into the sea during fits of rage that his staff always ensured his flagship had an extra crate of binoculars on board. Some more fun stuff about him: he would make up insulting nicknames for ships and officers he disliked, such as the lecherous slut, the sink by themselves squadron, or the guard's uniform hanger. Beat the tar out of crew members that disobeyed him. Would fire live ammunition across the bows of errant ships, and was known to pull other ships alongside his just to scream at its captain in front of the entire crew. Despite all this, he was considered one of the best officers in the Russian Navy and was well liked by his crew, and took full blame for his defeat at the Battle of Tsushima in order to save some officers from the death penalty. So while he may have been hot-headed and had high standards for his crew, he was ultimately a fair and honorable man, just doing the best he could with what he had, and probably better than could be expected of anyone else in his position. Honestly, the Russian 2nd Pacific Squadron's voyage is a ridiculous topic in of itself. The amount of sheer incompetence is comical. Drachinifil has a fantastic video on it. Would highly recommend. The shortest war occurred between Zanzibar and the British Empire, lasting around 45 minutes. General Omar Bradley was stopped by MP during the Battle of the Bulge in World War II due to them thinking he was a Nazi infiltrator. The irony was that he was stopped because he correctly identified the capital of Illinois as Springfield when the officer thought it was Chicago. The longest ever US presidential inauguration speech was made by William Henry Harrison on the 4th of March, 1841. The day had terrible weather, yet Harrison chose to deliver his speech nonetheless, running 8,445 words. In fact, the speech was so long, and the weather so terrible, that Harrison caught pneumonia and died on the 4th of April, making him the shortest reigning US president ever. The election of Volodymyr Zelensky as president of Ukraine. People talk about how crazy it is that a reality TV star got elected president of the US, but I think this story is even crazier. Zelensky was the star of a political satire show called Servant of the People, where he played the president of Ukraine. The show's last episode aired on the 28th of March, 2019. 3 days later, Zelensky carried 30% of the popular vote in the first round of elections, almost double the number carried by the incumbent President Petro Poroshenko in second. 3 weeks later, in round 2 of the election, Zelensky won with 73% of the popular vote. This is like West Wing star Martin Sheen defeating George Bush to become president in 2004. Just seems like the type of thing that'll be turned into a great documentary in 50 years. During the Cold War, there was an idea to drop XL condoms labeled medium onto the Soviets to make them think we were anatomically superior and be more afraid of fighting us. Easily my favorite part of American history. The battle for Castle Itter, a castle in Austria where the Wehrmacht and Americans fought side by side with French pals against the SS. Seriously, someone should make a movie about this. Geographics has a fantastic video on it. Edit. You Tactical Toast 7 wrote a much more in-depth explanation of the story. Go check it out. Ancient Greek and Roman marble statues were actually originally painted and were colorful. A lot of the statues' paint faded away and went away over time. Some people cleaned off the paint thinking it was debris or dirt, and other people just plain cleaned and removed all of the paint off of them because they preferred the look of white marble. Rome was actually a very colorful city, and it wasn't all made of just boring plain white marble. The capture of the Dutch fleet at Den Helder on the night of the 23rd of January 1795 presents a rare occurrence of a naval battle between warships and cavalry, in which a French Revolutionary Hussar regiment captured a Dutch Republican fleet frozen at anchor between the 3 kilometers (1.9 mi) stretch of sea that separates the mainland port of Den Helder and the island of Texel. After a charge across the frozen Zuiderzee, the French cavalry captured 14 Dutch ships and 850 guns. A capture of ships by horsemen is an extremely rare feat in military history. It is told, by Herodotus, that when Xerxes invaded Greece he had to build pontoon bridges, which were destroyed by a storm before completion. Xerxes was so upset at what happened that he had every engineer beheaded and sent soldiers down to whip the sea 300 times for its failure to obey him and comply with his plans. Canada and Denmark have been playfully fighting for control of a tiny island near Greenland called Hans Island for decades. When the Danish visit, they leave a bottle of Danish schnapps liquor. When the Canadians visit, they take the schnapps and leave a bottle of Canadian Club whiskey and a sign that says "Welcome to Canada." Stalin used to take people on the side to have some drinks with them or invite them to join him for a vacation in his holiday home. Khrushchev wrote about how much he hated those drinking breaks and vacations. Of course, Stalin would try to get you drunk and get info from you, and could decide he wants to kill you during the vacation, but you can't really decline his invitation. Khrushchev would also try to subtly get Stalin drunk as well and get info from him. One time during a vacation with Stalin, Stalin asked him to dance a Ukrainian folk dance in front of a bunch of people. Khrushchev hated dancing, but he had to do it. Herostratus is the guy who burned down the temple of Artemis. The only reason he did it was to have his name written down in history. In 1908, there was a car race around the world that started in Nick. The route would start in Nick to San Francisco to Valdez, Alaska, across the Bering Strait, through Russia and Europe, with the finish line in Paris. Cars were relatively new and road infrastructure was limited to only metropolitan areas, and even then, a lot of it was cobblestone. But what you might have thought is, how in the world can a car get across the Pacific? Duh. They would drive across the Bering Strait during the winter when it froze into an ice bridge. Silly. The race began in February 1908 and immediately ran into challenges. To list a few: cars breaking down multiple times, lack of usable roads, car-hating people giving wrong directions, and oh yeah, snow. The first team reached San Francisco in 41 days, but quickly realized that the proposed route from San Francisco to Alaska did not exist. So the organizers allowed teams to ship their cars to Valdez, Alaska, then continue on the ice bridge. Once in Valdez, the teams found out that there is in fact no ice bridge across the Bering Strait anymore because it melted 20,000 years ago. Small oversight. Organizers then allowed teams to ship their cars across the Pacific to Japan and Russia to carry on. Despite all unpredictable and hilariously predictable odds, the winning team arrived in Paris 169 days later. Highly recommend to listen about it from the Dollar Podcast. There's more nonsense that happens that I couldn't fit in remember. Abraham Lincoln's son, Robert Todd Lincoln, was present at 3 different presidential assassinations. After McKinley, he decided not to accept any more invitations. Before Abraham Lincoln became a politician, he was a champion wrestler, with more than 300 bouts under his belt. Lincoln only lost 1 match in his career and was inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame in 1992. The British once sent a guide to China as a spy so he would uncover the secrets of making tea. The Massachusetts colony banned celebrating Christmas. During that time period, many people used it as an excuse to get hammered and party. Another tradition was that the young adults would cross-dress then go door to door singing songs and demanding food. This clearly doesn't fit with Puritan lifestyle, so the governor banned public celebrations. People could still celebrate it in their homes if they didn't get too rowdy. I think it was unbanned when Massachusetts became a state, but didn't become mainstream until Christmas became a national holiday. Nashville briefly legalized prostitution during the Civil War. Union soldiers stationed there kept getting syphilis, so the no prostitutes were put on a large barge in the river. I'm a little fuzzy on what happened after that, but no, it didn't work very well. So it was legalized and prostitutes had to be registered or get a license. I can't remember which, and we're required to have STD checks. This lowered the amount of prostitutes with syphilis because it was getting caught and treated. That lowered the amount of soldiers getting syphilis and made the army happy. It was outlawed shortly after the war ended though. A very high-ranking Nazi, Ernst Röhm, was gay, was killed 1934, and Hitler knew about it, but it didn't bother him. Funny how homosexuals were then put in concentration camps. During the Viking era, there was a leader named Sigurd. He allied with a Viking warlord named Thorstein. He wanted to conquer more land and expand his territory. He had already been very successful in doing so. This was until he feuded with another leader called Mjøl Bucktoothed or Mjøltusk. As his front 2 teeth were abnormally large and buck-toothed, they decided to settle their matters on the battlefield and both agreed on bringing 40 men each for the battle. However, Sigurd ignored the terms and brought 80 men. Bucktoothed had realized he had been betrayed but did not give up. They killed a number of Sigurd's men, but alas, they were overpowered and were all killed. Here's the catch. After the battle, Sigurd ordered his men to behead all the enemies and tie them to their saddles as trophies. However, as Sigurd rode home in victory, the severed head of Bucktoothed pierced his leg, which led to an infection, killing him soon after. There are literally entire books of anecdotes of this sort on Ben Franklin. That man was the OG of trolling. He was so good at trolling under the pen name of a female, Silence Doggett. He received several marriage proposals. Only then did he reveal her true identity. Potatoes were not very popular as a food in France. Like they were seen as fit only for animals. Not only that, but they were considered generally not digestible by humans. So a pharmacist named Parmentier knew they were good food and wanted to popularize them among the working class. So he got a 2-acre farm to grow potatoes and placed armed guards around it at all times. People assumed armed guards meant something very valuable was growing there, so they began to steal the potatoes. That's how potatoes became popular in France's working class. Karl Marx's great-great-grandson has a YouTube video of him doing parkour, called !Marx. In the book, The Art of War, I read about a Chinese general whom, after defeating his enemies, invited them all over for dinner. They accepted but were cautious. At the dinner table, the other men were skeptical because they had thought that the general was going to poison them. This was far from the truth. The general actually retired his enemies by giving them a place to stay, riches, and women. They never betrayed him. Make friends with your enemies so that they don't betray you. We'll get more info later. But if anyone can do me the favor, that would be great. Edit. It was actually the 48 Laws of Power that I was reading, but I believe that the author, Robert Greene, took some inspiration from The Art of War. My mistake. Edit 2. Wow. My very first silver award ever. Thank you. Awesome stranger. Edit 3. Here is a quick summary. In 959 AD, General Chao Kayuong-yin became Emperor Sung, and it was probable that he would be murdered in a year or two. Desperate to break the cycle, he invited his fellow powerful generals to a banquet and dismissed the guards. The generals in the room were now very afraid that the king was planning on killing them all, here and now, in one fell swoop. To their surprise and relief, the king made them an offer. Give up your commands and I will give you fine estates and beautiful dwellings where you can enjoy singers and girls as companions. The now relieved generals took him up on his offer, realizing that a life of riches and security preferable to a life of constant anxiety and struggle. Just like that, he made enemies into friends. Pepsi once had the 6th largest military in the world after the price of Russian vodka couldn't cover their deal for Pepsi products. So they traded 17 submarines, a frigate, a cruiser, and a destroyer for a trade deal. Fun fact. The president of PepsiCo at the time told the national security advisor, "We are disarming the USSR faster than you are." 2 separate times that we know of, one single man has stopped the world from going into thermonuclear war. During the Cuban Missile Crisis and the American blockade of Russian ships to the island, a Russian submarine on patrol was found by the Americans and was under soft attack. Ships were dropping depth charges on them to try and get them to surface and communicate. Of the 3 officers on board, 2 wanted to fire a nuclear torpedo in retaliation. Vasily Arkhipov disagreed and was able to prevent the launch because it required unanimous agreement. They surfaced and didn't start WW3. Vice Admiral, the second man, was working at an early warning station in the USSR, and they, falsely, detected a missile attack from America. Stanislav Petrov stalled the alarms and prevented a preemptive counterattack. 25 minutes later he got confirmation it was a glitch and had also prevented WW3. There have also been countless other accidents involving nuclear weapons throughout the decades, with many coming dangerously close to triggering an unintentional explosion. We're lucky, to say the least, to have avoided catastrophe so far. Ronald Reagan was a prolific lifeguard when younger, saving 77 people from drowning. Former US President Andrew Jackson was approached by a man who pulled a gun on him. Smaller history fact: this was the first assassination attempt on a US president. The man pulled the trigger and the cap went off, but the gunpowder failed to light. The man pulled a second gun and fired, but the gunpowder again failed to light. The assassin tried to get away, but not before Andrew Jackson got him and beat the it out of him with a cane. Hitler, Stalin, Trotsky, Freud, and Tito were all living in the same area of Vienna in 1913. People were buried alive so often in the 19th century that a safety coffin was invented so the dead would have the ability to alert those above ground if they were still alive. Pythagoras drowned a student to death because a student proved the existence of irrational numbers which contradicted Pythagoras and his cult's, the Brotherhood, beliefs. US sailors sunk a Japanese sub in World War II using potatoes, The first known political cartoon is Egyptian, and Joe's Hatshepsut, the only woman pharaoh, pegging her lover and chief architect Senmut. The death of Cato. He killed himself by ripping out his internal organs one by one. One of my favorites is the story of Tommy Fitzpatrick. In 1956 he stole a small plane from New Jersey for a bet and then landed it perfectly on the narrow street in front of the bar he had been drinking at in Manhattan. 2 years later, he did it to a gainer after someone didn't believe he had done it the first time. What's also crazy is that the punishment for the first time ended up being only a $100 fine, since the charges were dropped by the owner of the plane, and the second resulted in only 6 months in jail. Here is an article about it. Henry Cavendish, the man who was vital in the discovery of gases and discovered hydrogen. He inherited a ton of money from his uncle and built a special castle, I think. He was incredibly introverted, so it was designed so that he never had to meet or see any of his servants. He communicated with them through notes only. He did, however, appreciate other scientists coming to visit and talk. His works mostly came after his death, of course, but I found this guy interesting. The entire country of Malta was awarded the George Cross for its efforts in World War II. It's still on their flag. Emperor Caligula of Rome declared war on Neptune. He had his troops randomly throw spears into the sea and collect seashells as war trophies. When the Allies were invading Germany, General Eisenhower sent a message to General Patton telling him to go around Trier because it would take 4 divisions to capture. Patton sent him back a message saying have taken Trier with 2 divisions. What do you want me to do? Give it back? Edit equals derp I'm retarded. In 1994, a war almost broke out between Russia and Sweden because of fish farts from herrings. That's how they communicate. Because Sweden heard the farts in their waters and they thought it was Russian submarines. In 1967, Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt disappeared while swimming in the ocean. He was presumed drowned. So naturally that year we named a swim center after him in memoriam. Edit, added his name. Which I meant to do when I wrote the post, but obviously my brain snapped midway through the sentence and I forgot it. In 1898, author Morgan Robertson wrote a novella titled The Wreck of the Titan, or Futility. The plot involved a fictional ocean liner, the Titan, which sinks in the North Atlantic after striking an iceberg. In the story, a acute Titan was described as the biggest passenger ship in the world. It carried the minimum number of lifeboats allowed, resulting in a large number of her passengers and crew perishing. 14 years later, RMS Titanic sank in strikingly similar circumstances. 3,000 Moroccan rebels defeated over 23,000 Spanish soldiers. Of Banjul, a Moroccan sultan had over 1,000 children. Ibn Sharif. Edit. Some other facts. Tariq bin Ziyad was one of the main Berber generals who conquered Iberia, Spain plus Portugal, for the Umayyad Caliphate. When he arrived to Iberia with his army, it is said that he ordered that the ships he arrived in be burned. To prevent any cowardice, the nation of Gibraltar's name is derived from the Arabic Ia Diaresis Ia, romanized as Jabal Surik, literally meaning Mount of Tariq. Once FDR died, Truman didn't know about the Manhattan Project, but when he found out, he subtly tried to tell Stalin they were working on something big. Stalin was like, yeah dude, I knew before you did, since he had so many spies in America. Surprised it didn't get mentioned, but here goes. The freaking Siege of Tyre, by Alexander of Macedon. So, Alexander the Pretty Awesome was doing his thing, rampaging through the Persian Empire, because that's what you do. Anywho, he comes across the island city of Tyre, an impregnable island fortress who had been a wee bit too chummy with the Persians. For Alex the surprisingly vindictive, they had a powerful navy that kept hampering efforts at taking the siege to them, and Alex the more than adequate was getting peeved. Now, the whole issue was that impregnable island fortress required an attack by sea, so Alexander the balls to the walls just decided to turn a shallow isthmus between the mainland and the island into a landmass, thus turning Tyre into a peninsula. Crazy shenanigans, involving cranes on boats, naval raids to impede on the progress of the Macedonian troops and engineers. In the end, Tyre fell. Alexander the impossibly persistent was rewarded with victory. TLDR. Alex the not too shabby sees an impregnable island fortress, turns it into not an island,